Hi everyone! Today has been a kind of crazy day. I've been swamped with college-related stuff. I'm in the middle of transferring to Flagler, which is in St. Augustine, which is like one of my favorite cities in the world. Well, in my limited scope of the world, which consists so far of like a brief cross-country trip across the United States, a few years in California, a few more years in Virginia, and some miserable years in Florida, which is not really me. And I think St. Augustine is the only city that I've experienced in Florida, at least, that has any real culture and sense of community there. So it's just exciting. It's exhausting and nerve-wracking, though. All the financial aid stuff that I have to do still, and just the overwhelming realization of like how much money I'm going to be paying, and but I did get the new album from Hilary Duff, which is what I'm listening to right now. If you guys can hear that, I'm not sure. I couldn't turn it off for this video. It's so good. Like, I can't stop listening to it. So you guys are just gonna have to suffer through it if it's distracting, or you can turn my video off if you want to. But I wanted to make a video today, really quick. I tried to make this video before, but I wasn't saying exactly what I wanted to say, so hopefully this one works out a little bit better. I've been reading this book called Womanspirit Rising, and it's subtitled A Feminist Reader in Religion, and is edited by Carol P. Christ, which is that woman that I was trying to tell you guys about earlier who wrote The Rebirth of the Goddess, but I kept calling her Christina or some other C name. Well, here it is. Her name is Carol P. Christ. Go pick up Rebirth of the Goddess. It's really interesting. Definitely pick up this. I think The Rebirth of the Goddess is very limited, obviously, by one person's perspective, which is difficult in this kind of in any kind of spirituality, really, just because people have such differing opinions, and one person's opinion is not necessarily going to gel with yours, and it's just very limiting. Whereas I think spirituality should be, inclusive of everyone's opinions. That way you get a well-rounded idea of what divinity is, and develop your own brand for yourself. But where was I going with that? This is actually an anthology, really, of different articles and essays written by different women who are searching for a more feminist spirituality. And this isn't just in pagan religions or pagan beliefs or pagan spirituality, whatever you want to call it. It's also within Christianity and Judaism, possibly in Islam, but I haven't read anything by that, and I haven't read anything about anything like that in here. That would have been really nice if they had that, so hopefully that does pop up, but I'll let you guys know. But in religions that are basically patriarchal and generally perceived as being sexist, which is fascinating. It's interesting to see, and it's only the first half, really, that is strictly Christian or strictly Judeo. And it's interesting just because I personally perceive Christianity. I'm not totally certain about Judaism, but I'm fairly certain just because I know that a lot of their beliefs stem from the Old Testament, which I've read, and I find it extremely sexist and very violent, and doesn't necessarily paint the best picture, I don't think, of that God. In the New Testament, I kind of see that as making up for that, but I won't get into that. But it's interesting just to see how these women kind of cope with it, and I'm trying to remain really open-minded about it because, and I did write a post about this on my blog that you guys can check out, about something, about an article written by Tribal, I think that's what her name was, who was one of these women who was trying to find the feminism in Christianity. And in the blog post that I wrote, I went through why her argument didn't really gel with me, and why, to me, still, Christianity seems to be pretty irredeemable. the language that is involved, the themes that are talked about, the way that certain characters or people are presented as, such as, you know, a lot of the female characters as being less relevant than the men, more oppressed than the men. It creates a religious environment that is going to be oppressive no matter how one spins it. And I go into more detail in that blog post, so I'll probably post that on the bottom in the little thing down there if you guys want to read it. I think it brings up some interesting arguments, so, you know, guys, let me know what you think if you guys end up reading that. So yeah, like I said, I'm trying to remain open-minded about the different beliefs that are brought up in the first half about Christianity, just because, like I said, I do kind of see it as being irredeemable, but I also realize that, I wrote in the blog post that the Bible has been basically in control by men for centuries, and that not even sexual politics or like Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex could withstand that. Like, after centuries of being in control of like the biased opinions of sexist men, like both of those books would be totally irredeemable as well. And that maybe that we need to look into even more ancient sources, like the beginnings of Christianity, or right before the beginnings of Christianity, or even, you know, those gospels that are not considered gospels because they were written by women or about women, or, you know, whatever the reason is. You know, maybe we need to look outside of the Bible for different sources. But then, you know, I struggle with that because I struggle with the thing with the Bible is that it is so often proclaimed as being the Word of God. And so I feel like if you were going against that in any way, and I think the Bible can be very specific about the rules and the commandments associated with that religion, and I feel like if you go against that in any way, and then still claim that it's the same thing, you're really kind of kidding yourself. And there are so many more options. If you don't believe in the basic tenets of that religion, then why are you still calling yourself a Christian? Why don't you branch out into other religions, other ideas, other concepts and beliefs, which are really the same ideas as you're having, that you're trying to explore within a constrictive religion, but are ultimately more freeing because they offer you that ability to change yourself, change your opinions, and to learn more and, you know, grow in a different direction if that's what you want. And like I said, you know, I think that people who don't look into like paganism, and I don't want to come off as like an elitist, like paganism is like the best answer, but just that there are a lot of answers within paganism that I think can be viable for women specifically who are finding themselves in you know, Western patriarchal religions that make them feel as if they are unappreciated or oppressed, that make them try to manipulate that religion in a way that it just doesn't want to be manipulated into. And I think part of this comes from the fear of hell that Christianity instills into people. I knew that was probably one of my biggest issues. I kind of got over it by the time that I started to get into paganism, something because of my sexuality, which made me question the religion, and I had to come to terms with the fact that, you know, I'm not going to hell because of my sexuality, which is a difficult time. So, but I get that fear because it is very much thrust upon us from like a very young age, the possibility of hell and the torment that goes on there. Like, it's a very scary thing. But you can't let that fear stop you from understanding divinity in a way that is, you know, wholly loving and wholly compassionate and unconditionally loving, you know. So anyway, you know, that conversation is a lot more complex than I was getting into there, and if you guys have opinions on it, you know, feel free. I know that there are a lot of Christo-pagans out there, and you know, Christian witches and things like that, who I'm sure have completely different ideas than I do. And if you have examples of feminism in the Bible, of it being empowering towards women, or to anyone really who is oppressed, and who I think is usually depicted as being oppressed in the Bible, feel free to show those to me. I'd love to read them. And I will say this about Christianity. I was thinking today, what the benefits of Christianity are. And I think one of them is that even though it is a limited freedom that is depicted in the Bible and that is represented by Christians, it was still pretty... It was very influential, I think, in the eventual liberation of many different types of people. It really started with the Bible, with the liberation of the poor, and the understanding that, these are people too, and they deserve at least, common human decency. And from that was just the first step, and it led into eventually women, and then, now it's leading into people of color and to gay people. Like it's sort of like a domino effect. It was just the beginning. It wasn't quite everything, and it's still not quite everything, which is why I think that we need to move on from it. It was a nice start, but we got to move somewhere else, I think. But it did ultimately do some good things, and I just realized that my water is leaking all over my table over here. Great. You see the benefits to women, as sexist as it can be sometimes, during times like the Middle Ages and times after that. Women were able to sort of escape into their spirituality and take on positions of authority, and positions that offer them more freedom than getting married to a lord and having his children, or more options maybe. They could become a nun, they could become an abbess, they could become really influential within that religion and really respected in that way. And this is seen in the different saints, the different female saints. And, look at Joan of Arc. Like, her religion, her fervor for God allowed her to break the bonds of her time's gender norms and do something that was amazing. So all of that I really respect. And I totally respect Christianity's role in religion. But it came about in a time that was still very behind the times, obviously, because it was ancient, and they had very misguided ideas about what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a man. And I think now is time, and I think the same thing about ancient religions too, but that there is a lot there, especially in extremely ancient religions that sort of occur prehistory, where we can offer up our own interpretations of it and create something that is truly feminist and truly it's something that truly embodies modern values and morals. So yeah, that's just my little opinion there. What I really wanted to talk about, or mention really, I don't know if I want to talk about it, I just thought it was a really cool connecting of the dots here. But I was reading an article by Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, who is a Catholic. The article is called Feminist Spirituality, Christian Identity, and Catholic Vision. And she kind of starts out talking about the role of women in society as these creatresses, as people who are able to create life. And in the beginning, the original human societies, the original humans, didn't understand the man's role in the act of creation, in the act of procreation. They thought it was womanly specific, or specifically womanly, and thus associated with divinity. It was mysterious, it was dark, it was misunderstood, and not even the women themselves understood what exactly was happening, so they associated that with the divine as divine influence, doing something with her body in order to create life. Something because they were just so ignorant. And for the longest of time, this was considered as woman's power. and in a way, maybe subconsciously, as women's hold over men. You know, men can't do this, women are necessary, men are kind of irrelevant because they can't continue life. Even though they really could, they were part of that process. And just as important, without them, like, you can't have anything. Without either sex, you can't have anything. We would all die or become non-existent. But that this initial feeling of irrelevance and insecurity followed men, perhaps subconsciously, most likely subconsciously, throughout history. In more recent history, men started to implement these rites of passage into adulthood. And these rites of passage, sort of like, you know, I'm thinking in some African tribes where they'll have scarification, and it'll be strictly older men scarring younger boys with different wounds, basically, on their skin that mark out, you know, that they're a man now. And maybe more relevant to our culture, we see this in baptisms and bar mitzvahs, where once again it's a very masculine type of ceremony that involves usually strictly male figures, bringing out this process of rebirth, almost as competition of the initial birth brought on by woman. And it's their claim of, well, we can do the same thing too, but we're kind of doing it better. Because while you as a woman gave birth initially, yeah, that's great, but it's also organic and ephemeral, and we're all going to eventually die. But the birth that we're bringing on is actually spiritual. It's a rebirth, going from the organic passages of the birth canal to the, you know, ethereal passages of, you know, this man-made birth canal into the spiritual afterlife, or whatever you want to call it. I don't think I've used the word birth canal quite as often in at any other point in my life, but you know, that's the gist of it. By men creating these rites of passage into adulthood, and in Christianity specifically, and Judaism specifically, with circumcisions, with baptism, and what was the other one? There was another one that I don't remember now. But they're essentially saying that the original birth was just the beginning, and it doesn't last forever, and so therefore it is inferior to the spiritual rebirth of a person, which lasts eternity, you know, in heaven after you die. So it's a little bit of a competition, and there's this really interesting paragraph that I'm just going to read really quick by Fiorenza, which kind of boils that down into a specific statement that you guys can kind of get your hands on a little more than my jumbled ramblings. But here it is. Yet there appears to exist a deep fear in men that women's powers would become so overwhelming if they were admitted to the priesthood and the sacramental ritual, that men would be relegated to insignificance. The demand of women to be admitted to the sacramental priesthood is therefore often not perceived as a genuine desire of women to live their Christian vocation and to serve the people of God, but as an attempt completely to overtake the church. What men are often afraid of is that the change in role and position will not mean a mere shift in the relationship between men and women, but a complete destruction of any relationship or a fatal reversal of the patriarchal relationship. And I think you see this insecurity being played out in all sources of life, in business and family relationships, within the church, obviously, like we just sort of went through. It is very much a part of this dichotomy between men and women. And it stems from the very beginning, from the fact that women can give birth and have that control over life. And even though we know now that it is actually, you know, a process of equals, of one person contributing something and another person contributing something in order to make something new. I think that initial fear of irrelevance and of inferiority is still lodged in our brains as men, which is unfortunate. And so another interesting thing about that passage is the end, where she describes men's fear as the possible usurping of men by women, which is just so interesting to me, just because if you look at the evidence of matriarchal societies, and we don't even really like to call them matriarchal societies because they are so different from patriarchal societies. It's not like women were implementing the same status and power as men are now. It was completely different. They had completely different values and customs within these matriarchal societies. But anyway, that's another discussion. But within these matriarchal societies, there wasn't, from what we can tell, any kind of inequality between the sexes. It was woman-centric. It worshipped female deities, things like that. But there seems to be a sense of harmony involved there, at least a harmony among the sexes, and perhaps a give and take between them. Whereas the society that we live in now very much overpowers and oppresses certain people, women, people of color, gay people, people of varying gender identities, and varying sexual identities. And I guess men fear, these people who are in these positions of power, they fear that maybe they fear the vengeance that might be kind of deserved. I mean, they've oppressed these people, they've made these people's lives so much more difficult. Maybe they fear that after this power shift occurs, they might take their chance and seek vengeance against them. So I don't know, but anyway, it is interesting. And I don't know, as I was talking about that, I don't know if woman-centric religions are necessarily bulletproof or invincible against the possibility of the overpowerment of one sex over another. I think there's a lot that can help prevent that, but I don't know if it would stop it completely. And my religion is very goddess-centric, and it works for me personally, but I was thinking about, what if this goddess-centric, or this woman-centric religion was created as something that was universal and that everyone believed in? Would we have a world that was maybe a flip-flop version of our world today that is matriarchal in the patriarchal sense of the word, and that women are now in the roles of men, and men are now being oppressed? I don't know if that's possible, but I do think that there might be an imbalance that would be created, which is why I like the idea of individual spirituality, of each person developing their own idea of divinity, and using that to kind of make their way in the world, because I think it helps to prevent an overemphasis on certain ideals and what is the word? I don't remember now. A preoccupation maybe with maybe the feminine aspects of deity, or the masculine aspects of deity. We see that in the Christian religion, where we do have this preoccupation and this focus on masculine energies and themes, and specifically the aggressive aspects of the masculine, and it's thrown us out of balance in a lot of ways. And I would hate to see that happen with a goddess religion. It would happen in a different way. I don't know if it would be quite as severe, but I think you need to have both concepts kind of running around, or maybe many concepts of divinity and many different people. Maybe we need to start talking about how everyone, from the time that they're born to the time that they die, should just read and read and read and learn as much as they can about life until they can come to a point where they feel at peace with their ideas of divinity, of what comes after, of what is now. And maybe that's what we need to strive for. So, I don't know. But I'm going to go ahead and end this video. Thank you guys for listening to me. Please, read Womanspirit Rising. It is infinitely fascinating. It is a jewel, really. Something that is so great. It's just a different point of views. Like, you will not find a book that has so many different point of views from so many different women about one subject, which is religion. So yeah, pick it up. Hope you guys have a good night. Thank you.